Welcome to my talk. So today we're going to talk about the hardening automation with Kubespray. But first of all, a brief introduction about myself. Who am I? Just 1 second. Okay. So who am I? My name is Alessio Greggi. I work as DevOps engineer at Clastix. I also had an experience as a security analyst in my previous working experience. Out of the work, I'm a full-time tin opener for my cat and also a book lover. And in my free time, I'm trying to be an open source contributor day by day. You can find me on GitHub and Twitter with this unique account, which is Allegray91. But let's start the talk. So, first of all, a few words about Clastix. Clastix is an Italian company and is really focused on the Kubernetes ecosystem, specifically for the Kubernetes multi-tenancy. We are a small team, and we are really involved with the open source. So this is the reason why we developed a couple of Kubernetes operators for the multi-tenancy to manage the multi-tenancy in a soft and a hard way. So using Capsule, you can provide essentially a namespace as a service. Instead, with Kamaji, which is the hard approach, you can provide a control plane as a service. So let's see now, which is the Clastix use case. So why we decide to follow this path and why we decide to use Kubespray. The Clastix customers usually are cloud providers. This because we develop this kind of Kubernetes operators. So essentially, they use these operators to manage the namespace as a service and the control plane as a service for their customers. So what a cloud provider essentially does? Well, essentially, they share their infrastructure with external actors. And hopefully, these external actors are going to be their customers. But what happens if an external actor has malicious intent? So these actors could be considered like an attacker. So what they ask to us is to provide an hardened solution for their infrastructure, or better, for their Kubernetes cluster. And so thinking about the hardening, the first thing that we thought was a security guideline to follow in order to achieve this goal. So the SIS benchmark probably is one of the most common security guideline that you can follow, and you can you can set up your cluster. So our decision was for the SIS because it's one of the most common. Also, it has a great story behind. It has also a great community behind. So for this reason, we adopted the SIS. Another thing that our customer usually asks to us is a 24/7 technical support. And this is really hard to achieve for us because we are a small company, so it's not so easy. And having these things, we started thinking to a possible solution to achieve the goal for these requests. And as you can imagine, the solution was using Kubespray. So Kubespray, just a few words about Kubespray. Kubespray is a Kubernetes 6 project, so it has been recognized by the Kubernetes organization as a project of interest by the community. And also for this reason, it has a great community support. So if you have a bug inside Kubespray, you probably have already an issue that have been opened. What Kubespray does? Well, it aims to deploy a production-ready cluster. So this cluster is going to be battle-tested and also really supported. it supports the high availability that for our customers is really important. And also, it supports the most popular Linux distribution. So having this feature, we avoided any kind of integration issues with our customers. In the end, it also is based on an Ansible playbook. So for people that know Ansible, it is really close to the system. It is also easily extensible. And another reason why we decided to use Kubespray and specifically Ansible was the knowledge about our team. So having this knowledge, we were able also to contribute in case we need it. And in fact, is what we have done in the end. The last thing is that it was really crucial for us because Kubespray from the recent versions adopted the use of kubeadm under the hood. So it essentially downloaded the binary for kubeadm and used the binary to install the cluster. Why this information was crucial for us? Well, because kubeadm is the official installer for Kubernetes. So it is supported by the Kubernetes community, but also you can essentially have the support from bigger companies that are able to provide the technical support. So using kubeadm was a kind of must for us. So what we have done in the end? Well, essentially, the first thing that we have done was to collect all the SIS benchmarks that we needed to achieve the SIS compliance with the cluster. So as you can see, we started supporting the EventRateLimit admission plugin to be configured from Kubespray. So we also achieved the SIS 129. We also kept track about the service account lookup for the SIS 1226, and also the streaming connection idle timeout and the make IP tables util chains from the kubelet. And in the end, we also supported the parametric user to have the right ownership of certain files for the SIS 1119. But this was not the only one thing that we have done. We also contributed in a different way. Always focused on the hardening, but not related to the SIS. So it was a kind of general hardening. What we had done was to split the KubeFeatureGates variable. And then we also had the SeccompDefault admission plugin for the kubelet. And we also hardened the kubelet systemd service. And in the end, after all of this contribution, we provided an hardening setup guide for the community. So let's start from the EventRateLimit contribution. In order to understand, I will explain a little bit what the EventRateLimit does. Essentially, it mitigates the problem where the API server gets flooded by event requests. So what does it mean? It means that think about a multi-tenant cluster where all the tenants are running their workloads. And for each tenant, there is a little percentage about these workloads that are not working, essentially. So they are generating failure, they are generating errors, and these errors are essentially are events. And these events are essentially going to flood the API server. For this, the EventRateLimit comes to help you. And essentially, you can set up some limits for the API server in order to avoid any kind of denial of service attack or something like this. So it's a sort of an antidote for the multi-tenant for a multi-tenant cluster. So what we have done was to provide a friendly interface for the user that want to use Kubespray and configure this admission plugin, providing the same interface that you have using KubeADM. So essentially, you can set up different kind of limits, and for each limit, you can decide the type, the queries per second, the burst, and the cache size. So after the event rate limit, we also provided a contribution in order to manage the streaming connection idle timeout. The streaming connection idle timeout is a parameter from the kubelet, and it essentially defines the maximum time that an idle session is permitted prior to be disconnected. And the most important fact is that by default it is set to 4 hours. That you can understand that is a really long time if you think to an attacker, because in this time you can essentially do whatever you want. So managing this parameter was essential to achieve the SIS benchmark. So what we have done was to provide a variable that allow you to decrease the time, so the attacker is not allowed to do anything in your cluster essentially. Then the split for the kube featured gates variable. This is not really an hardening feature, but this led us to set up another hardening feature. So the kube featured gates essentially allow you to manage the featured gates in a generic way for all the components. So essentially, what you are doing with the kube featured gate is to configure all of the components in the same way. And what happened, for example, if you have the kubelet with a specific name, specific feature gates, for example, the kubelet in namespace or the SeccompDefault. So these feature gates are present only on the kubelet, so you are not able to configure correctly this component with the kube feature gates variable. So for this reason, we provided all of these new variables in order to configure each component with the right way, essentially. And as I said before, this essentially led us to configure the kubelet in the right way using another admission plugin that has been recently added in the code base. That is the SeccompDefault admission plugin. So for people that doesn't know what essentially Seccomp is, it is a filter for system calls. So you have your set of defined rule, and inside the rule you can have the whitelisted syscalls that are allowed by the kernel to run inside the system. So if the syscalls are not present in the rule, they will be dropped. So specifically, what the SeccompDefault admission plugin does. First of all, it has been introduced in Kubernetes 1.22, and what it does is essentially it sets the default profile from the unconfined to the runtime default. So the unconfined profile is essentially an empty rule, so you are not blocking anything. Instead, for the runtime default, this profile is provided by your container runtime. So if you're using ContainerD, you will have a custom profile. Instead, if you are using Cryo, you have another custom profile, but they are quite similar. So SeccompDefault essentially set this default profile to your pod. And you can check this using the pod inspection and checking the security context. So on the left side, you can check what essentially ContainerD does in its code base. And on the right side, This is the way that we use to configure Kubespray to enable this feature. In the end, our latest contribution, the Kubelet systemd service hardening. Well, starting from systemd 2035, has been introduced some sandboxing features. So you can essentially isolate the systemd service with these sandboxing features from the rest of the system. And systemd also provided a nice tool to analyze the security exposures of these systemd services, that is systemd analyze, with the subcommand security. And you can check the output on the left side about systemd analyze. So you have a column dedicated for the security exposure of the system. Instead, on the right side, you can check that an example about the sandboxing features for systemd. And for example, you can read about the private temp or the non-new privileges. And in the end, you can find also the IP address allow. So what we have done with the Kubelet was to provide, at first, a variable to enable this feature. So you can enable or disable in order to have a safe environment. And also, for now, we just supported the IP address allow and deny, but probably we will contribute in other ways to increase the information that you can configure, essentially. But what we have provided also is a variable to whitelist the IP addresses that can communicate with the kubelet. So the result of this thing looks like this. So you have the kubelet that are whitelisting some IPs, and these IPs are from the control planes. So by default, only the control planes can communicate with the kubelet. So a potential attacker that is in the same network is unable to communicate with the kubelet because systemd is setting up essentially a minimal firewall using the an eBPF feature that has been recently introduced. And also for this reason, this feature is depends on your system version. So you have to be sure that you are using eBPF and also that you are using the cgroup v2. So thank you for your attention, and the talk is finished. Keep your cluster safe.
Awesome. Thanks, Alessio.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Great talk about securing your clusters.
Yep.
I think really good talk. I don't know if there are any questions on Slido. If you do have any questions, that's the QR code to go to. If not, Alessio, you're still here again?
Yeah.
Probably still here for drinks as well.
Yeah,
everybody's staying here for drinks. So feel free to jump onto Alessio and ask him any questions about Kubespray. Thanks for the work you're doing in the community. You'll have a coffee break now. We'll see you back at 15:50. Do check out our sponsors, both in K4 as well. So if you keep on going down and then turn left, you can get some cool freebies. Thank you.
Thank you.